Alison tightened the knot of her dark burgundy apron and hurried to pick up the polished silver tray from the pass, which would be her faithful companion for the rest of the day. "Fifth table," called out April, the restaurant manager, after her. "Yeah, I'm on my way," Alison nodded in response and confidently pushed the revolving kitchen doors aside, brushing her reddish bangs off her pretty face. She had been working as a waitress at the Golden Lion restaurant for a year and had learned to fit into the hectic rhythm of the establishment when circumstances demanded. The job was far from easy, but it had its advantages, such as staff meals provided by the establishment and flexibility. However, the main advantage of working here were the generous tips that often helped Alison make it from paycheck to paycheck without dipping into her so-called untouchable cash reserve, where she saved the money for her subsequent training at a college. The Golden Lion was not just an ordinary cafe where you stopped by to gulp down a couple of cups of coffee or order mashed potatoes with a cutlet for a cheap lunch. No, there was a full-fledged menu here, consisting of several selections of Eastern and Western cuisine, where you could find both Asian pad thai noodles with chicken in sweet and sour sauce, or Korean-style fried rice with scallops and shrimp, as well as Greek Caesar salad, meat stewed in French pots, or Italian pizza made according to ancient recipes by an experienced chef who had trained in Rome itself. To emphasize the speciality of his establishment, the director of the Golden Lion specially hired an administrator who personally controlled the arrival of all guests and made sure that the most affluent of them always got the best tables. April could quickly assess the income of the guests and based on that, distribute them to the most advantageous seating positions. She would then signal the waiters in what order and at what speed to serve them this or that order. Alison correctly caught the gaze of the manager, who pointed her to a group of young businessmen in the right corner of the restaurant. They obviously came from a large business centre across the street. Judging by the fact that there was not a single free seat at their wide table, they were either celebrating something or concluding some grand deal. Alison decided to approach them a little later and first served the handsome elderly gentleman at the second table, who was modestly sitting behind a huge exotic floor plant in a bright clay pot. His strict business suit and neatly combed grey hair, together with his gold watch and exquisite pen, identified him as a practicing lawyer. Such people constantly strive to settle all their personal affairs as quickly as possible, because in the office they already, no doubt, have a couple of prospective clients waiting for them, missing out on which would be an unacceptable thing. The main hall had quickly filled up with visitors, and Alison took a deep breath of the cool air. She was in for an extremely tough work shift today, in large part because her partner had chosen the wrong day to get sick. Friday was one of the busiest days for cafes and restaurants, and poor Nina had fallen ill with a cold, so Alison would have to be alone all day, which was very difficult when the restaurant became so crowded that there was literally no room to move. Suddenly Alison caught April's angry glare, who whispered with her lips, "Table 5, quickly!" The girl felt momentarily flustered, as there were so many people around and she was alone, but then the waitress managed to gather herself. Taking control, she headed towards the group of wealthy men who were still waiting for her to appear at their table. "Look who has honoured us with her attention," one of the businessmen half-jokingly muttered. "Miss, we've been waiting for you for an hour." Alison apologised, introduced herself and took their order. As the girls suspected, these young, respectable businessmen were celebrating some happy event, as evidenced by the number of snacks they ordered, as well as several bottles of alcohol, which the men asked to be brought to them immediately for an aperitif. As the young waitress waited for the food in the kitchen, a furious April ran up to her and asked, "Where have you been, Alison? Do you want to destroy our reputation in one day? These are our most important guests. You should have run to them first, and you left them waiting for a quarter of an hour. This is simply outrageous." "I have everything under control," the waitress said, calming her down. They were still engrossed in their conversation, and besides, they had to decide on their choice of dishes from the menu. There are 7 of them, so they can't. April's beautiful face turned crimson with anger. Are you going to argue with me? Hurry up and get in the hall. Otherwise I'll tell the director right away, and he'll kick you out with a snap of his fingers. Alison didn't argue any more and hurriedly brought the first batch of alcohol and snacks to the designated table. As soon as the food and drinks were in front of these young men, their mood immediately improved. Based on her previous work shifts, the waitress knew that this kind of audience became much softer and less demanding towards staff after half an hour, and therefore they could leave her very generous tips. In confirmation of the girl's thoughts, as soon as she headed off to serve other guests, she heard the first of many long toasts by the businessmen colleagues congratulating each other. A little relaxed that the situation had taken a calm flow, Alison went to work further, allowing these wealthy men to have fun until it was time to bring them snacks or an additional portion of wine. The girl decided to keep an eye on them to be able to approach them in time when needed. Currently, when Alison wanted to focus all her attention solely on this 5th table, the restaurant door unexpectedly creaked, letting in a new guest into its space. The waitress turned around, obeying her professional instinct, and to her surprise, she saw a little boy, almost 7 years old, shyly sitting down at the furthest table. The child seemed to want to become as inconspicuous as possible, so as not to distract other visitors from their lunches and daytime coffee. His old, worn-out jacket was picturesquely torn at the right elbow, and his jeans were short, exposing the skinny, bony ankles of the boy. The boy squeezed his old knitted cap in his hands, looking around fearfully. Looking at him, one could think that this little boy was a homeless person who had accidentally wandered here by the beckoning lights of the bright signboard. Alison was interested in what he was doing here, and besides, the woman always had a kind soul, she thought. Let the little one warm up a bit. In any case, the restaurant won't suffer from it. Just in case, she decided to approach and ask if the boy wanted something to eat. Surely he had been hungry all day. Would you like to order something? Alison kindly asked, approaching his table. Hello, the boy said a little shyly. Ma'am, I'd like a cake with cream. Alison felt her heart warm up. She really liked how this poor boy politely asked for a treat. It was evident that he had a natural upbringing and tact, even though life apparently had not been very kind to him. Of course, Alison said cheerfully, shaking her reddish curls. Would you like strawberry or banana cream? The little guest was a little confused. It was evident that he was not used to being treated nicely, and did not expect that he would be spoken to kindly here. After thinking for a moment, the boy slowly said, I think I'd prefer with banana. Wait a minute, okay? Alison decided to stay a little longer at the boy's table. The rich clients, meanwhile, continued to have fun and empty their wine bottles, so they wouldn't need her for the next half hour. They won't be going anywhere, the girl thought in passing, and the poor boy was their guest as well. In a few minutes, a beautiful banana cake with airy cream and a cup of tea were placed in front of the boy. At the sight of the dessert, the boy's eyes lit up with delight. Wow, he exclaimed admiringly. This is wonderful. Do you like it? Alison asked, smiling. She was pleased to see his joy. Very much, thank you, he replied, thanking her from the bottom of his heart. Enjoy, and just in case, the chef warned that this is one of his true culinary masterpieces. At that moment, a small but already obvious wrinkle appeared on the boy's forehead. The little boy frowned and then hesitantly asked, Excuse me, please, he said, but if this is a masterpiece, then how much does the pastry cost? Alison checked the menu and named the price. The boy instantly turned pale, then in horror stared at the treat. What's wrong? The woman asked him worriedly. Nothing, just The boy sighed heavily. "I only have a couple of dollars with me. I'm afraid I won't have enough for this masterpiece." Alison was confused for a second, then leaned over to the boy and whispered conspiratorially, "Don't worry, I'll pay for the order myself. Just eat and enjoy the moment, okay?" The boy stared at her with wide eyes. Alison was once again amazed at how much depth and gratitude there was in them. It seemed that this boy, at 8 years old, had already clearly understood by what rules this harsh world around him was playing. "Ma'am, thank you very much," the boy whispered with one lip. "You are the kindest of all the people I have ever seen." Alison lightly tousled the boy's hair, as if to say that there was no need for thanks. But suddenly a dissatisfied scream was heard behind her. "What kind of rude attitude towards clients is here? How long are we supposed to wait? Where's that red-haired wench?" The waitress immediately understood from the tone and stuttering of the speaker that they were talking about her. It turned out that the rich guests at table 5, to whom Alison had failed to bring appetizers in time, were outraged. "Ah, there she is!" unexpectedly exclaimed one of the wealthy members of the group, the most audacious. "Hey, come over here quickly." The girl felt incredibly offended, but there was nothing she could do. All waiters are taught to accept the dissatisfaction and complaints of wealthy clients in order to not tarnish the reputation of the place. Meanwhile, April rushed over to that table and began to calm down the seriously agitated businessmen. "Excuse me, please. Don't worry. The girl will come over in a moment. She's the only one on her shift today, and as you can see, there are quite a few guests in the hall. She's running around between the tables." However, the main troublemaker did not even think about calming down. On the contrary, he only became more nervous and began to shout openly to the entire hall. "I saw your little wench running around. Look, she's been chatting with that little bum at the table for a long time. If you're running a charity canteen and feeding all sorts of dirty bums, then you should have said so right away. Decent people wouldn't come here then. Oh, you've created an unsanitary mess here. I'll immediately call the sanitary and fire inspectors on you." The other guests involuntarily started to look towards the drunken company. Alison had already managed to rush over to the riotous men and tried to defuse the situation by offering to pay their bill herself, although the girl could not even imagine how many months she would have to work free in this case. "Of course, you'll work it off, my dear," the businessman teased Alison. "Only you'll do it somewhere else, because I'll make sure you're kicked out of here, straight to the dump. Redhead witch." "Gentlemen, please calm down. There's no need to shout like that. You're scaring the other guests." April tried to pacify the men as best she could, but it was all in vain. At that moment, the director appeared in the hall. Mr. Jennings was known to be a straightforward and very hot-tempered person. Seeing what scandal was unfolding in his restaurant in broad daylight, he could not remain at his workplace and decided to personally find out what was going on. "What's the matter?" the man began immediately. "Why are our guests dissatisfied?" The businessmen colourfully described to him what Alison had done to them. Alison looked pleadingly at April, hoping that at least she would stand up for her colleague, but the beauty herself was standing like a statue, silently looking at her boss, hoping that this thundercloud would pass her by. When the businessmen finished their angry speech, Mr. Jennings' eyes filled with blood, angry at the waitress. "Alison, damn it, what have you done here? Who allowed you to serve the homeless?" "According to the rules, you should have kicked out this little bum onto the street." "And what are you doing instead? Serving him dessert from the chef? Are you in your right mind?" "But Mr. Jennings, he's just a child." The woman spoke up for the boy. "Who could he have disturbed here? Besides, I would have paid for his order. Nothing bad would have happened." "Fool!" the director exclaimed in anger. "Fool! We're a premium class establishment. Premium! Doesn't that mean anything to you? This isn't a canteen or some McDonald's, for God's sake. How could you have allowed something like this?" Suddenly he looked at the boy, who was still sitting at his table, frozen with fear in front of the untouched pastry. "You're still here?" the director shouted at him. "Get out of here, so my eyes don't see you, and don't come back here again." The boy hurriedly pulled his knitted hat over his head and ran out onto the street, increasing the distance between himself and the unfortunate restaurant with every passing second. Mr. Jennings adjusted his jacket and turned back to Alison, struggling to contain his anger in his trembling voice. "Alison, work your shift today and then get the hell out of here without month bonus. Understood?" The man then turned to the group of businessmen, the main and most insolent of whom was quite pleased, not hiding his petty triumph. "And to our guests we, of course, offer our deepest apologies." The director dispersed before them in courtesy. "From our side, we will pay for your entire order, as well as give you a special compliment from our chef. Teutonic-style meat with onions and steamed vegetables. All the best, and enjoy your meal." The businessmen nodded in agreement with Mr. Jennings' generous offer, and he, smiling so much that it seemed like all the muscles on his face were already completely tense, hurried back to his office. Alison, abandoning everything, rushed after him. Mr. Jennings, how can this be? I've been doing a good job all these months. And by the way, what did this boy do to you?" The director reluctantly stopped and turned to Alison. "You have long been overdue to take responsibility for your actions, madam. The boy should not have appeared in my restaurant at all. It's nonsense. Shame! So the next time you want to go against someone, with your virtue, think hard first, and then decide on all sorts of adventures. And yes, since we've mentioned it, the chef's compliment and the entire order of these young people I will definitely deduct from your salary, dear. So don't be surprised when you receive the final calculation. And now get to work in the hall, quickly." For emphasis, the director clapped his hands several times. The rest of the evening, the woman held back bitter tears of offence with all her might. She did not understand why, despite wanting to do better, she ran into a brick wall of incomprehension from her eccentric boss. As she wiped up spilled orange juice, the young waitress sadly remembered her past. Alison was about 20 years old, and she had learned one simple truth since childhood. In this complex world, in all things concerning you or your loved ones, you should rely only on yourself. No matter what the matter is, money or the safety of your own life, only you can decide what will happen to you tomorrow. This philosophy did not appear in the girl out of nowhere. When she was only 6 years old, her parents perished in a terrible fire that occurred at the summer house of their relatives. Her father and mother had gone out of town to celebrate her Uncle Lou's birthday. Little Alison was left with a nanny at home, but as her parents promised, this was only for one night. They said that there was nothing for a child to do in the company of adults, and in the morning they would immediately go home. Alas, they never returned from their uncle's summer house. At night, a tipsy group decided to arrange an impromptu fireworks display, and sparks from the fireworks hit the wooden house, which flared up on a hot summer evening like a match. The girl's parents were trapped in the burning house and could not get out in time. The only survivor in this terrible accident was Uncle Lou, who had organized this unfortunate fireworks display. He was outside at that moment and became an involuntary witness to the tragedy. The man immediately called the fire department, and when they arrived, it was too late. Of course, Uncle Lou never intended for anything like this to happen, but his carelessness led to the fact that now the man was serving a prison sentence. Manslaughter by negligence was still considered murder. After that night, Alison couldn't stand only two things in her life: alcohol and fireworks. She always tried to stay away from mass celebrations and found it difficult to tolerate people who had been drinking. This may have been one of the reasons why she subconsciously avoided approaching the group of businessmen that evening. There was too much alcohol on their table, and they quickly reached the point where their brains could no longer control the actions of their physical bodies. This instinctive dislike caused Alison discomfort. After Alison's parents' deaths, her grandmother saved her from an orphanage and took the girl home with her. Mrs. Smith was a wonderful woman who combined authority and strictness with honesty and a commitment to justice, sometimes at the expense of her own interests. Alison remembered very well how she and her grandmother first arrived at her large apartment on the Central Avenue. Before that, Mrs. Smith had hardly communicated with her granddaughter, and the little girl didn't even have a clear idea of where and how her grandmother lived. This situation was because Mrs. Smith had a poor relationship with her daughter, Alison's mother. The grandmother believed that Alison was always frivolous. She didn't finish university and then married that fool Chris, Alison's father, who worked assembling portable equipment at the plant. Of course, little Alison was very upset about her grandmother's negative attitude towards her parents, but the girl stayed silent so as not to upset the old woman unnecessarily. Only much later as an adult did she accept the fact that in some ways her stern grandmother was right. All her life, Mrs. Smith taught children to play the violin and piano at music school. Because of this, the woman's home was characterized by the strictest discipline, and violating it meant inviting her wrath. Wake up at 6. Breakfast is at 6:30. You'll have to cook it yourself, as I don't have time for that. From 7 to 12, school or self-study if you're spending the summer at home. Then lunch. From 1 to 4 p.m, reading or playing the violin. From 5 to 8 are lessons. From 8 to 9 is your spare time, but at your place. I would devote it to self-education again. Finally, at 10 o'clock, it's strictly lights out. Be kind enough to follow these rules and then we'll get along just fine in this house. This was the way Mrs. Smith admonished her granddaughter, not forgetting to scold Alison's mother. Remember, Alison, if you allow yourself to be lazy, even for a moment, you will end up just like your careless parents. Grandma, why are you talking about them like that? The girl pleaded every time. I always loved them, and I will continue to do so. Why are you so angry at them? Why am I angry? Mrs. Smith repeated it menacingly. Well, didn't they ruin their lives so thoughtlessly? They drank and went to those stupid hippie parties every time someone invited them. They left you an orphan, by the way. Your mother never wanted to study. She was a kind soul, but what good came of it? She spent her whole life flitting around like a dragonfly until the fiery rooster bit her. Your father, may he rest in peace, had no ambition at all. With his golden hands, he could have taken a course or two at an engineering school, and who knows what he could have achieved. Instead, he used to listen to his records and go drinking with his brother. That's how he ended up. The grandmother stopped short when she saw tears in her granddaughter's eyes. You may think I'm cruel and mean, Alison, she said. Maybe I am, but nobody has ever helped me with a kind word in my entire life. I'm still dealing with you, so to speak, like a hen with a chick, but I had to fight for everything tooth and nail. That's how it was. In this life you have to fight for everything and work hard to become the best. And if you spend your youth lying on the couch, you're not far from sin. Laziness, my dear, is the first sign of human weakness. If a person can't make themselves change their own life, who will help them? Despite her young age, Alison understood the message that her grandmother was trying to convey to her, and she tried her best to live up to her expectations and not disappoint her. Soon, with her diligent studies and help with household chores, the girl gained maximum trust from the woman. Mrs. Smith hardly ever punished her granddaughter, only if the matter concerned some egregious cases, such as the one time when some girl from school allowed herself to make a sarcastic remark about Alison's deceased parents. Alison then gave this girl such a beating that she complained to everyone for a long time, and Alison's grandmother was called in for a special conversation with the school principal. That evening, Mrs. Smith gave her a fiery tirade in which she tried to instill in her young granddaughter the basic concepts of honour, nobility and mercy. But she got what she deserved. Little Alison tried to justify herself. Why would it be okay for her to insult my mum and dad and get away with it? I think I did the right thing. The grandmother only theatrically waved her dry hand. And where is the justice in that? Huh? Is it in the fact that you were the first to start beating up that poor girl? Or in the fact that you couldn't control your anger, which can be such a destructive feeling? She's not a poor girl at all, Alison cried out in anger, while I have to walk 1/2 kilometre to the bus stop and then another 5 kilometres to school. Why can she do whatever she wants? And she has money, and I can't do anything and still have to pity her? I just don't understand it, Grandma. Mrs. Smith sadly smiled. Yes, she drives a car and can afford a lot, including hurting weaker people. But think for a moment, what will happen to her next? A person who has money and audacity but no intelligence is not the best role model, is it? Is it much better to be a noble and merciful person? Someone who can easily tell a bully that she is not worth your attention. Believe me, my dear, the ability to rise morally above such people is worth a lot and will be much more useful to you in life than hatred and blind anger, even if justified by serious arguments. Alison pondered her grandmother's words deeply. Certainly she was right about something, but how is it possible to control your feelings when people around you constantly criticize your own family? For the girl, this case became an occasion to learn to better control her thoughts and emotions, and in this regard she was gratefully helped by playing the old piano at her grandmother's house, on which Alison honed her musical skills at every opportunity. Of course, the girl did not play as professionally as her grandmother, but it helped her find harmony with her inner world and reflect on things that, in ordinary life, she sometimes did not have time for. Mrs. Smith was always strict in raising her granddaughter and did not trust her until the time when the girl, turning into a high school student, finally proved her reliability and prudence. Most of the time Alison spent at home, helping her grandmother with cleaning or cooking. To go on a date or to a disco, Alison needed special permission from her grandmother, which she could not always get. Despite the fact that the teenager inside her often rebelled about this, Alison tried to treat such moments as calmly as possible, convincing herself that good music could be listened to without leaving home, and that a quality book would be much more useful to her than spending her time with some unfamiliar guy. These methods of education eventually bore their positive fruits. Alison was able to go through the difficult period of adolescent formation almost painlessly, managing not to get involved in any dubious stories. By the end of school, Alison had turned into a well-educated girl who had every chance of continuing her education at a good college. But fate prepared her for another difficult test. Mrs. Smith, due to her venerable age, suffered from several serious chronic diseases. She was admitted to the hospital with acute renal failure. Tormented by unbearable pain, the woman held on until the last minute, trying not to worry her granddaughter, who was about to take final exams at school. Alison in turn spent all her spare time from studies and the library at the bedside of her strict but beloved grandmother. Most of the money they saved during their time living together, the girls spent on medicines that, though a little expensive, eased the suffering of the old woman. Alas, everything comes to an end. Mrs. Smith passed away quietly in her sleep, peaceful, knowing that she raised a worthy person out of Alison. Several months of hard fighting for her grandmother's life seemed to Alison like long years. The girl herself seemed to have matured by several years. Her last teenage dreams were shattered by the harsh reality in which she remained completely alone, without a penny in her pocket. Ahead were final exams and a new, absolutely unpredictable adult life. Fortunately, evil fate could not break the fighting spirit of the girl, tempered by the truly Spartan upbringing. Where others would have given up and surrendered to the will of complex life circumstances, Alison, on the contrary, began to fight fiercely, with doubled energy, for her place under the sun in the cruel and inaccessible society. Trying to find a job, the girl immediately began sending her resume everywhere and attending numerous interviews after finishing school. However, difficulties awaited Alison here too. Despite having an honourable certificate for academic achievements, the young job seeker couldn't find a job. Employers were not ready to take on an employee who had no professional experience. Each time the recent graduate was faced with a refusal, always the same wording: "Sorry, but currently we are not ready to invite you to work in our company. Try contacting us next year when you have minimal experience in the desired position." Gradually, from an applicant for the role of a full-time employee or a business company, Alison moved into the category of applicants, first for the position of a sales assistant, and then the cashier of an ordinary supermarket. And still, the girl repeatedly received refusals, as if some invisible shadow was following her. Alison was very upset, feeling an increasing panic inside. She feared she would soon become completely unemployed. What would she do then? The girl simply couldn't imagine, because she still had to pay for her grandmother's apartment every month, and expenses for food and clothing couldn't be ignored. Instantly, when Alison was already desperate, fate unexpectedly took pity on the unhappy girl. Help came from where she least expected it. One day, Alison went to an interview that, as she hoped, would finally bring her the coveted position of junior manager assistant. They told her on the phone that they were ready to consider the girl's candidacy, but with a probationary period. Encouraged, Alison literally flew to the office, anticipating long-awaited success. However, when Alison arrived, she was deeply disappointed. It turned out that just a couple of hours before Alison was supposed to come, the director of the company had hired another, more experienced employee for this position, who already had experience with document flow at the previous company. To say that the girl was crushed by this failure is to say nothing. Alison left the company building, walked a couple of steps, after which she stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk and, without embarrassment, burst into loud tears in front of everyone. Then it was absolutely unimportant to her what others thought of her. After all, her last hope for improving her financial situation had suffered a complete collapse. Passers-by looked at the girl in complete bewilderment, but no one stopped and tried to offer her any help. But suddenly, Alison heard a quiet, calm voice behind her, clearly addressing her. "Well, why are you crying, girl? Look, you're about to flood the whole street with your tears." Alison turned to the voice and saw a pleasant woman about 40 years old in front of her, holding a cute bag of large knitting with an extremely unusual salad green colour. She also wore a knitted beret in the same shade as the bag. The woman was looking at the girl with interest and frank sympathy. "Oh, don't even ask, please," the girl replied, sobbing. "Have you ever had this feeling that the whole world around you is collapsing into an abyss, and you're standing on the edge and you don't know what to do? It seems that there is no point in running back because you will fall anyway. But you do not want to jump forward either." The woman frowned and quickly approached Alison, taking her by the elbow. She suggested that they go to the nearest park and sit on a bench to rest and talk properly. Alison was too exhausted to refuse, and besides, the strange woman, whose name was Mrs. Cravat, had managed to win her over. Yesterday's graduate felt that she could trust her, and right now, more than ever, Alison needed support and the opportunity to share her doubts with someone. Later in the park, the two started talking. Alison told Mrs. Cravat about almost all recent events in her life, including the death of her beloved grandmother. She ended her story with an honest confession that she was afraid of being permanently unemployed. Well, well, what a situation. Mrs. Cravat shook her head, causing her funny hat to tilt slightly to the side. Have you tried going to the job centre? Of course, Alison said through tears. They tell me to take the lowest position, at least as a secretary. But how can I become a secretary if they require experience everywhere, and I don't have any, except for my school? Mrs. Cravat thought for a moment. She really wanted to help this poor girl, as she had shown herself to be so nice. However, would Alison agree to accept her offer? After all, the girl graduated with honours, and now this. It won't be below her status, of course, just a little bit. Well, never mind. Listen, Alison, I have one offer for you, but I don't know if you'll like it. You see, I work as a cook's assistant in a respectable restaurant, and we're currently catastrophically short of waitresses. Last month, one girl broke her leg, some kind of complicated fracture, and says she'll have to spend at least 3 months in a cast, and another one just went on maternity leave a week ago. In short, do you want to go to our restaurant as a waitress? Alison looked at Mrs. Cravat in amazement. She couldn't believe that this nice woman was offering her a job so easily. What? Do you mean as a waitress? You're not joking, are you? The woman's round face broke into a kind smile. What jokes could there be, my dear? I'm offering you a real one in Golden Lion. Our director, Mr. Jennings, is quite a character, of course. He's a hard nut and a piece of work, but you can get used to him. In any case, he won't eat you for nothing. Mrs. Cravat laughed, and Alison suddenly felt someone turning on a bright white light inside her. It was hope. Oh my God, of course I agree, the girl exclaimed joyfully. Thank you so much, Mrs. Cravat. Thank you so much. And when can I start working? The woman was a little embarrassed, but then she patted Alison's hand and quickly said, Let's do it this way. I'll go to work tonight and I'll put in a good word for you with the director. And you come tomorrow morning early. Just don't be late. Deal? Alison nodded in agreement, and Mrs. Cravat shook her bright green hat. Well, that's great. And don't cry. Tears are never helpful in our line of work. Calm down and come tomorrow, exactly at 9 o'clock, when the restaurant opens, she reminded the girl, just in case. After saying goodbye, they went about their business. Alison spent the rest of the evening and the first half of the night in nervous anticipation. She was distressed, hoping that at least in this place everything would go smoothly. Unpaid utility bills lay on the coffee table next to her. Finally, the girl managed to fall asleep with an uneasy, restless mind. The next day, Alison stood in front of the wide revolving doors of the Golden Lion at 8:40 in the morning. The girl was very nervous and kept pulling at her already long skirt. She wanted to make a good impression on the director so that she could finally get the coveted job. Inside, the restaurant was huge, with a beautiful European standard renovation. Shiny new panels were everywhere, and crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting light on the shine of polished parquet floors. The menu here was also excellent. There were at least 20 different hot dishes alone, and the rich wine list could easily compete with some small French restaurants. In short, Alison was very impressed with the place where she was about to start working this morning. The director reluctantly but still hired the girl. Mrs. Cravat's personal request played a role here. After all, as Mr. Jennings said, Mrs. Cravat could make such a Caesar sauce that even Michelin himself would be delighted. This, as well as the complete lack of prospects for hiring a competent waiter in the next couple of weeks, made the director make a positive decision regarding Alison. Well, time will tell, he reasoned, and he showed Alison the utility room so that she could change into her uniform and meet her new colleagues. On the way to the utility room, Alison managed to notice Mrs. Cravat joyfully winked at the girl and showed her a big thumbs up. Having arrived in the utility room and exchanging a few words with other girls, Alison realised that they all worked here not for a good life. For example, Nina lived in one of the poorest areas of the city and, without having any education, miraculously got a job here. Suzanne, on the other hand, had a good education but got pregnant early, and now she had to work here for half a day to be able to support her little son. Serious firms, she explained to Alison, would never agree to hire a young mother, let alone one with a 1-year-old child in her arms. The only one who came to work here by the call of the heart was Marissa, a young girl who wanted to become a cook. She decided to go here to gain experience, and later she was going to enroll in a college to learn the craft of cooking. In general, all the girls were united by one fairly clear aspiration: to earn as much money as possible in this restaurant to later be able to get a more prestigious job. Then Alison saw April for the first time. The statuesque beauty stood out favourably against the background of other girls with her impressive appearance, and was very proud that she was hired here thanks to connections. However, a little later, Alison concluded that the restaurant administrator had no more power here than all the waitresses, and therefore most of the establishment's employees were more than indifferent to her affected sarcasm and pathos. The colleagues quickly brought Alison up to speed, explaining how to categorize guests and assuring her that it was a valuable skill. You need to learn how to immediately determine who is in front of you based solely on their appearance, Nina advised Alison. If the suit is made of expensive fabric and the shoes look obviously more expensive than what you're used to seeing on men, then that's our client. These handsome guys usually come here to grab a bite from the elite business centre across the street. For them, a standard lunch is like a week's salary for us, and they always leave good tips. And the nicer you are to them, the more tips you can earn during your shift. Got it? Alison nodded uncertainly. And please keep in mind the most important thing, Suzanne continued to her friend. At the end of the day, all the money received as tips must be presented to Mr. Jennings. But aren't we supposed to keep that money? Alison asked hesitantly. We earned through our quick thinking and tolerance towards the guest. Well, you did earn it, Marissa replied sarcastically, but he always takes the biggest share anyway. Those are the rules here, my friend. If you complain, you'll be shown the exit. Alison realised that the job she had gotten was far from easy. After a brief safety briefing and rundown of the basic rules of behaviour for waitresses in the hall, April threw Alison into the deep end. Alison's first shifts were monstrously difficult. At first she felt like she couldn't keep up, but then as she got used to it, the young waitress felt that she was already doing well in communicating with the visitors, and she became more confident in holding the tray of food. However, every day at the end of the first week of her new job, the girl literally collapsed from exhaustion. Huge calluses formed on her feet almost instantly due to the uncomfortable shoes that all the girls were required to wear. Gradually, Alison was able to get into the swing of things, and each new shift no longer brought her such torment. And now everything was over. Not only was Alison fired from the restaurant, but the director, who didn't pay her full salary, that scoundrel, knew $200 in her face and laughed. Everything else went to pay off your debt to Golden Lion. Or did you think we were joking here? Get out of here, fool. The other waitresses sympathised deeply with the poor girl, but unfortunately they couldn't help her in any way. They were too afraid to repeat the fate and lose their job. Mrs. Cravat was especially worried about Alison. "Look at him, what a jerk. Okay, he'll get his signature oyster pudding tomorrow evening. I'll put something special in there so that he remembers it for a long time." "I can't believe that he started humiliating poor employees in front of everyone. It will end up with him running around the hall with trays and glasses. All the girls will either quit or get fired because of him. So don't worry, Alison. You're not the first and you won't be the last, as they say." Alison thanked the assistant chef for her kind and encouraging words, but deep down she wasn't sure that such a firmly established order in this restaurant would ever change. Gathering her things, the girl said goodbye to everyone except April, and then left the walls of the Gold Lion forever. For the next few days, Alison couldn't even get out of bed. Depression weighed heavily on her, not allowing her to escape from the crushing burden of various problems. For a brief moment, Alison gave in to dark thoughts and sinfully thought that it wouldn't be so bad to follow her grandmother and parents to heaven. However, she soon forced herself to throw all of this out of her head. What would her grandmother say if she saw how her beloved granddaughter was wasting her spare time completely uselessly? Alison forced herself out of bed and brewed herself a strong cup of coffee. She had to decide what to do next, although the only logical action in this case would be to start looking for a new job. Taking out her old dusty laptop from the closet, Alison began to browse through the latest job listings. At that moment, she was attracted by some movement in the courtyard outside her window. Imagine her surprise when she saw the same poor boy who had politely asked her for a pastry not so long ago. "Hey, kid!" she shouted out of the window, then grabbed her coat and rushed out onto the street. The boy calmly collected cardboard scraps and glass bottles around the garbage cans, apparently intending to take all this to a special recycling point. Seeing this, Alison felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Wait!" she called out to him again. The boy straightened up and looked in the direction of the female voice calling him. To the girl's delight, he immediately recognized her and quickly walked towards Alison. "Hello," the boy spoke. "How happy I am to see you. I was so frightened of that scary mustachioed man that I ran away so fast that I don't remember how I got to the orphanage." "Do you live in an orphanage?" Alison asked. "And what's your name?" The boy shifted the package with his findings to his other hand, then smiled. "My name is Thomas, but you can call me Tommy." The boy adjusted his woolen hat and wore a serious look on his face. For some reason, this caused a strong feeling of pity and warmth in Alison's heart. "I see you're collecting cardboard. Is everything that bad?" the girl cautiously asked, not wanting to scare him off, but still needing to know some details about the boy. "Yeah," Tommy reluctantly began. "I sometimes run away from the orphanage to earn some pocket money. It can get so boring there that I feel like climbing the walls. But here at least I get some money, although I didn't pay for the cake back then. You really got it bad then, huh?" Alison was touched by the little boy's genuine concern, and so she made a final decision. "Not too bad. Hey, let's go to my place. I live here in this building. We can have some tea. I think I still have some biscuits left. You'll still have time to come back to the orphanage. And what's the point of wandering around the streets in this cold weather?" The boy agreed with pleasure. This became their routine. At first, Tommy would visit Alison every weekend and stay overnight. Alison, being an honest person, visited the shelter herself and explained the whole situation to the management. Fortunately for her, The director and the caregiver did not oppose her communication with the boy. After a short search, Alison found a job at the local hospital. First as a cleaner for half a day, and then for a full working day. Although the salary at the hospital was very modest, Alison had enough money to pay for utility bills and to please Tommy with sweets and other children's joys. Seeing all this, Tommy was ecstatic and never stopped thanking Alison every minute. Thus Tommy and Alison lived together for about a month, and then, on one of the short cloudy days, a big black car pulled up to the house where the girl lived. A tall young man about 30 got out of the expensive car and climbed up the old stairs to Alison's apartment door. The young woman, peering through the peephole, even hesitated to open it for him at first. "Good afternoon," the man greeted her when Alison finally opened it. "My name is Carl Parker. I suppose my son Thomas is with you now?" Amazed, Alison let Carl in, then hurried to put the kettle on the stove. The little boy stared at the handsome strong man in amazement, who so easily declared him his father. "You see, something terrible happened to me in my youth," Carl began a little later when all three of them sat down at the small kitchen table. "I was dating a wonderful girl named Beth exactly 8 years ago. We loved each other very much and wanted to get married, but my parents had an entirely different opinion." The man frowned before continuing, as if it hurt him to remember all this. "Anyway, my father and mother made it so that Beth and I broke up. There was a very unpleasant story. My father made up a brazen, absolutely horrible dirt about Beth, and I, a young fool, easily believed in this. Beth left me. She went to another city and soon found out that she was expecting a child from me. Because of my stupidity, she was so hurt that she decided not to tell me about the pregnancy." Carl took a deep breath and sipped his tea before approaching the end of his story with a trembling voice. Beth died during childbirth. I apologize for speaking so plainly, but in reality, it took me a long time to come to terms with it and accept my youthful foolishness. Tommy was immediately sent to an orphanage after he was born. I would never have known about anything if my mother hadn't told me everything before she died. "I'm sorry," Alison responded. "I'm very sorry that you had to learn about your son's existence under such tragic circumstances. I understand very well what it means to lose the people closest to you." The man looked at the girl with gratitude and sympathy. "You see, Alison, I'm a very wealthy man. I hired a private detective and he was able to find Tommy for me. Understand that this boy is the only one left on this earth who is closest to me. If you don't mind, I would like to take him to the house that is his by right of birth. Thank you so much for taking care of him." Alison was at a loss for words. During the short time they had spent together, she had grown very attached to the boy and couldn't imagine how she would live without him. However, Tommy had his own solution, with that charming, childlike naivety that only the kindest and purest children possess. "Daddy, I'll go home with you if you promise me that we'll go for walks with Alison every weekend. I love her very much and I don't want her to be sad without me." The businessman looked at his son with surprise, but agreed to fulfill his condition. The boy nodded happily and said, "And also, they fired her from work because of me. There was this big scary man who yelled at us so much." Tommy told his father the whole story in detail, and Carl's pure outrage was clearly visible on his face. "Oh, that Mr. Jennings. I should have shown him where he belonged a long time ago. He became too arrogant. Scoundrel." As it turned out, the boy's father knew the real owner of the restaurant where Alison worked very well, so they easily resolved the issue. Mr. Jennings had long been suspected of concealing part of the revenue from the total proceeds. The story with the waitresses put a fat dot in his dismissal. A couple of weeks later, Alison received a call and was invited back to work at the restaurant, but this time she was offered the position of administrator instead of April, who was fired straight after Mr. Jennings. The girl agreed with pleasure. She was truly grateful to Carl for everything he had done for her. Tommy now lived with his father but still missed Alison, so to avoid upsetting the boy, his father fulfilled his promise and began to invite Alison on joint walks with Tommy. The man believed that the boy's interest in this girl would soon wane, but almost imperceptibly he began to communicate increasingly with her, discovering her to have a very interesting and deep personality. Alison also liked Carl very much, but she was afraid that her humble origin would repel the rich man, so she did not show any initiative herself. Carl quickly understood what was going on and soon managed to break down the remaining social barriers between them, so the couple plunged headlong into a stormy romantic relationship, which resulted in a lavish wedding. Tommy was overjoyed that Alison could now live with them, and Alison in turn was incredibly happy to have found her soulmate and beloved little son. But this was only the beginning of their long and happy family life, as very soon Alison found out that she herself was expecting a baby. The couple hopes that they will have a girl because, last Christmas, Tommy asked Santa to give him a little sister.